They thought they were fixing a fireplace. Just loose stone. Old mortar. A simple job. But the moment the wall cracked open, something changed. Because the passage behind it wasn't built to hide something from the outside. It was built to keep something from coming out. Winter came early to Harlan County in 1887. Not gently. Not the kind of cold that settles like a blanket. This was the kind that pressed. That crept through wood and bone. That made houses groan at night like something alive inside them. The farmhouse stood alone at the edge of Poor Fork, where the land dipped into a narrow hollow and the mountains rose like dark walls on every side. Even in daylight, it felt cut off. By winter, it felt forgotten. The men arrived just after sunrise. 5 of them. Hired hands. Local. The kind of men who didn't scare easily because life had already shown them enough. Their job was simple. Tear down the old stone hearth. Rebuild it. Make it safe again. The fireplace had begun to crack along the back wall. Mortar crumbling. Stone shifting slightly out of place. Nothing unusual for a structure that old. At least, that's what they thought. By mid-morning, they had removed the first layer of stone. Dust filled the air. The smell of old ash, decades of it, rose like something disturbed. One of the men, a younger one named Caleb, noticed it first. "Wall's wrong," he muttered. The others ignored him. Until the foreman, Elias Pute, stepped closer. Ran his hand along the exposed surface. Then stopped. Because Caleb was right. The mortar behind the stones wasn't old. Not like the rest of the house. It was newer. Cleaner. As if someone years after the house was built had sealed something back up. Deliberately. Elias didn't say anything at first. But something in his expression shifted. A small thing. The kind men notice without speaking. "Keep going," he said. So they did. Stone by stone. Each one heavier than the last. Each one harder to remove. As if the wall resisted them. And then. A hollow sound. Not the dull thud of packed earth. Not the solid resistance of foundation. But something empty. The room went quiet. No one said it out loud. But they were all thinking the same thing. There was something behind the wall. Elias stepped forward again. Pried loose the next stone himself. It slipped free. And fell inward. Not outward. Inward. Into darkness. A breath of cold air rushed out. Not winter cold. Something deeper. Still. Like air that hadn't moved in years. Or longer. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Caleb leaned forward slightly. Just enough to see inside. And immediately stepped back. "No." That was all he said. Just that one word. But it was enough. Elias didn't ask what he saw. Instead, he took a lantern. Lit it. And held it toward the opening. The light stretched inward. And didn't reach the end. Because there was no end. Not where the light could touch. Just a narrow passage. Angling down. Cut into the earth beneath the house. Too precise to be natural. Too confined to be accidental. A man could fit. But only barely. Sideways. As if it wasn't meant for comfort. It was meant for necessity. Or desperation. And then Elias saw something else. Along the left wall. At about chest height. Marks. Carved into the stone. Not words. Not symbols anyone recognized. Just lines. Repeating. Evenly spaced. Again. And again. And again. Like someone had been counting. But counting what? Elias didn't want to guess. Behind him, one of the men whispered something under his breath. A prayer. Another stepped away from the fireplace entirely. Shook his head. "No," he said. "No, we ain't." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Because they all felt it now. Something was wrong. Not just the passage. Not just the marks. But the way the air felt. Heavy. Still. As if the space itself remembered something. Elias lowered the lantern. Took a step back. Then another. "Close it up," he said quietly. No one argued. No one asked questions. They began replacing the stones. Quickly. Too quickly for proper work. Hands shaking. Mortar applied unevenly. The kind of work men do when they're no longer thinking about the job, but about leaving. By noon, they were gone. All of them. Tools left behind. Work unfinished. And 3 days later, Elias Pute filed a statement with the county clerk. Not a complaint. Not a report. Just a record. A simple account of what they had found. And why they would not return. He didn't describe fear. Didn't mention the way the air felt. Didn't write about the silence that followed them out of the house. He only recorded the facts. The sealed passage. The carved marks. The descent beneath the home. And one final detail. The part he couldn't explain. The passage had been sealed from the inside. For years, the document sat in a folder. Unread. Unnoticed. Until it disappeared. Misplaced. Lost among hundreds of other forgotten records. And the farmhouse changed hands. Again. And again. And again. No one asked about the fireplace. Not at first. Not until someone noticed. The mortar on the back wall was newer than everything around it. Newer by decades. As if something had been hidden. Not once. But twice. But the truth of that house did not reveal itself all at once. It never does. Truth like that comes in fragments. A letter written and forgotten. A name that appears once, then vanishes. A detail that means nothing. Until it's placed beside another. And another. And another. Until finally, you see the shape of something you wish you hadn't. To understand what was buried beneath that farmhouse, you have to understand the land around it. Harlan County. Eastern Kentucky. A place the mountains did not just surround. They sealed. The Cumberland Mountains rose like barriers. Not just of stone, but of silence. They controlled movement. Controlled knowledge. Controlled truth. News traveled slowly there. But secrets. Secrets could last a lifetime. Or longer. Before the Civil War, Kentucky existed in a kind of tension. Not fully north. Not fully south. A borderland. Where laws conflicted. And loyalties split families down the middle. To the north. Freedom. Across the Ohio River. A line that meant everything. But here, in the mountains, there was no river to cross. Only ridges. Endless ridges. And narrow valleys where everyone knew everyone. And strangers were noticed. Watched. Remembered. Moving through this land required help. Trust. Silence. You needed to know which homes were safe. Which doors would open. Which ones would stay closed. And sometimes, which ones hid something beneath them. The farmhouse on Poor Fork was one of those places. Built in the early 1840s by a man named Absalom Cornett. A quiet man. Respected. Trusted. The kind of man whose word didn't need repeating. His wife, Margaret, was different. Not louder. Not softer. But sharper. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, people remembered. Some said she was cold. But they were wrong. She was careful. And in a place like Harlan County, careful people survived longer than kind ones. The house itself was ordinary. 2 rooms. A loft above. A root cellar carved into the hillside. And at its center, the fireplace. Large. Stone built. The heart of the home. Where heat gathered. Where light lived during the long Appalachian winters. Where families sat, ate, prayed, and waited for morning. But something about that fireplace was not original. Not entirely. Because long before the men in 1887 ever touched it, something had already been hidden behind it. Sealed away. Stone by stone. From the inside. And during the war years, people began to notice things. Small things. At first. The kind you dismiss. The kind you choose to dismiss. Because the alternative is harder to live with. Smoke. Rising from the chimney. In the dead of night. Not just early morning. Not just before dawn. But at hours when no household should be awake. 2. 3 in the morning. Darkness so complete it swallowed sound. And yet, the fire burned. Steady. Sustained. As if it had been fed for hours. And beneath that, something else. Sounds. Not voices. Not footsteps. But movement. Heavy. Dragging. Muted by earth and stone. As if something was being moved. Below the floor. Then silence. Complete. Sudden. The kind that doesn't feel empty. But intentional. Like something choosing to stop. Because it knows it's being listened to. And in the morning? Everything normal. Too normal. The fire small. Controlled. Ashes that didn't match what had burned overnight. Faces calm. Routine unchanged. As if the night had never happened. People noticed. Of course they did. But no one asked. Because in Harlan County, there were things you saw. Things you heard. And things you kept to yourself. But they wrote them down. In letters. In diaries. In quiet lines meant for no one else. And those lines survived. Waiting. For someone to read them together. And understand what had really been happening beneath that house. Some suspicions don't come from what you see. They come from what doesn't add up. From the quiet arithmetic of absence. A voice where there shouldn't be one. A shadow that doesn't belong to anyone standing in the room. That's what troubled the men who passed by the Cornett farmhouse during the war. Not what they witnessed. But what they couldn't reconcile. There were nights. Cold, moonless, stretched thin over the mountains. When light moved inside that house long after any decent family would have gone to sleep. Not candlelight drifting room to room. Not the soft flicker of someone tending a late fire. No. This light shifted. Paused. Vanished. Then appeared again, lower than it should have been. As if it wasn't moving through the house. But beneath it. One man, captured months later, questioned under oath, spoke of it only once. He described standing outside, watching. Counting. He knew how many people lived there. He had seen them earlier that day. Counted them through the window. And yet, when the voices came, there were too many. Low, brief, hushed quickly. As if whoever was speaking had realized they were not alone. He could never prove anything. So the suspicion stayed where most dangerous things stay. Unwritten. Unresolved. Alive. Then the war ended. Officially. But war doesn't stop when the papers say it does. Not in places like Harlan County. Out there, the violence didn't fade. It changed shape. Men came home carrying things they couldn't set down. Grudges didn't disappear. They hardened. Like ground in winter. And in that hardened ground, old secrets found room to grow. There were shootings. Fires that started in the night. Men who walked into the mountains and were never seen again. And no one looked too hard. Because sometimes, not knowing is safer than the truth. It was during this time, when the world above ground was already unstable, that something else began to take shape at the Cornett farm. Something quieter. More deliberate. His name was Clarence Duff. And he did not belong there. He arrived in the early 1870s. No history in the county. No family name tied to the land. Just a man on horseback, carrying tools in silence. People noticed him immediately. Not because he was loud. But because he wasn't. He spoke when spoken to. Worked when hired. Delivered exactly what he promised. No more. No less. And yet, there was something about him that made conversations end early. Not rudely. Just naturally. As if something in him resisted being known. His hands told one story. Calloused. Skilled. Precise. A stonemason. A builder. A man who understood how things were put together. And more importantly, how to take them apart. But his eyes told another story. People remembered that later. The way he looked at structures. Not admiring them. Not judging them. Measuring them. As if every wall he saw, he was already imagining what lay behind it. He found work quickly. Stayed at a boarding house in Clover Fork. Paid on time. Kept to himself. Didn't drink. Didn't linger. Didn't attach. In a place where community was survival. He remained separate. And then, in the spring of 1873, he was hired by Absalom Cornett. The job was simple. On paper. Repair the eastern foundation. Stones had shifted. The wall was pulling. Time had done what time always does. It weakens what men assume will last forever. The work should have taken 2 weeks. It took 6. At first, no one questioned it. There had been rain. Heavy, relentless. The kind that turns soil into something alive and unstable. But rain doesn't explain everything. And neither does damage. Because something else happened during those 6 weeks. Something no one recorded at the time. But everyone remembered later. Clarence Duff didn't just work on the outside of the house. He spent time inside. Long stretches of it. Near the fireplace. And Absalom Cornett. A man known for watching everything on his land. Let him. The payment was unusual too. Not just money. Something else. Unwritten. Unrecorded. A second agreement layered beneath the first. The kind of arrangement men make when they don't want details remembered. Years later, when Duff's ledger was found, there was an entry. Short. Almost careless. Consideration received. And beneath it, 3 letters. AGR. Agreement? Maybe. Or something else entirely. Something meant only for the man who wrote it. But what truly unsettled people? What stayed with them? Were the visits. After the work was finished, Duff kept coming back. Again. And again. And again. Not frequently enough to draw immediate attention, but often enough to form a pattern. 11 visits. At least. Over 6 years. People saw him on the road. Because in that part of Kentucky, a lone rider was not easily ignored. They remembered the direction he traveled. Always the same. Toward the Cornett farm. And when he returned, he said nothing. Explained nothing. Resumed life as if he had never left. Absalom was asked about it once. Casually. By a neighbor. Just conversation. Just curiosity. What's he helping you with? Absalom answered simply. Repairs. And it was true. In the way that truth can sometimes be used to hide something deeper. But the neighbor remembered something else. Something small. A flicker. A change in expression. Not fear. No. Absalom Cornett was not a man who frightened easily. It was something heavier. The look of a man carrying a weight. He had no intention of setting down. That look stayed with the neighbor for decades. Long enough to be spoken aloud in a courtroom years later. Long enough to become part of the record. Then came the winter of 1879. A hard one. The kind that kills quietly. Livestock froze where they stood. Water turned to stone. And breath itself felt like something you had to fight for. Absalom Cornett didn't survive it. They said it was pneumonia. And it probably was. But in places like that, causes of death are often only part of the story. He was buried when the ground thawed. Laid to rest above the farm. Looking down on the land he had worked. And whatever lay beneath it. Margaret stayed. Of course she did. Women like her didn't leave. They endured. They maintained. They kept things together. But even she could not hold it forever. She died 7 years later. Quietly. Without spectacle. And the farm passed to Hiram. Hiram was not like his father. Where Absalom had been steady. Hiram was contained. Reserved to the point of absence. A man who spoke only when necessary. And even then, as little as possible. Those who knew him noticed something after the inheritance. A change. Subtle. But real. Not grief. Not exactly. Burden. As if something had been handed to him. Not just land. Not just responsibility. But something older. Something heavier. Something he had no choice but to carry. And then came the winter of 1887. The cracks in the fireplace appeared after 2 hard freezes. Normal. Explainable. Fixable. Hiram hired a crew. Gave them clear instructions. Repair the hearth. Reinforce the structure. Do the work properly. And then he left. 3 days. Gone. No explanation. No destination given. That alone was strange. Hiram Cornett did not leave that farm. Not overnight. Not ever, but while he was gone. The men began their work. And the wall came down. And everything changed. When Hiram returned. He already knew. That was what Elias Pute would remember most. Not shock. Not anger. Not confusion. Recognition. As if the discovery had not surprised him. Only confirmed something. He thanked them. Paid them. Dismissed them. And asked one question. Did you file anything? When Pute said yes. Hiram nodded. Slowly. Not disappointed. Not relieved. Just certain. Then he went inside. Alone. And sealed the passage. Stone by stone. Mortar pressed carefully into place. Hands steady. Movements practiced. A boy watched him from the fence. Too young to understand. But old enough to remember. He would say later. Hiram didn't work like a man repairing something. He worked like a man finishing something. And he never once stepped back to look at what he had done. Because he already knew exactly what he was sealing shut. There is a difference between something that is hidden and something that is maintained. Hidden things are abandoned, forgotten, left to decay. Maintained things? They are visited, watched, cared for, returned to, again and again. And that is what troubled the people who eventually pieced the story together. Because if nothing had been left inside that passage, then why had it been used for so long? And if it had been used, then the real question wasn't what was inside it. The real question was, who had been inside it? And why someone had been counting. The answers didn't come from the passage itself. Hiram Cornett had made sure of that. He sealed it too well. Too deliberately. Like a man closing not just a door, but a chapter. So the truth had to be pulled from elsewhere. From paper. From memory. From voices that had nearly gone silent. It began with a doctor. In 1891, 4 years after the passage was discovered, a man named Dr. Samuel Rayron arrived in Harlan County. He wasn't looking for secrets. He was looking for numbers. Illness. Mortality. Patterns of health across a population that coal companies were preparing to exploit. But good doctors don't just hear symptoms. They hear what sits behind them. And Rayron had that gift. He listened. Not just to what people said, but to what they hesitated to say. To the pauses. The glances. The stories that started one way and ended somewhere else. That's how he found her. Priscilla Boland. She had lived her entire life in that valley. Seen generations rise and fall. Watched the war come and go. And leave something behind. When she spoke, she didn't ramble. Didn't speculate. Didn't soften her words. She said she had kept something for over 30 years. And she was tired of carrying it alone. There was a place, she told him. A place people went when they needed to disappear. She didn't say the name at first. But she didn't need to. Rayron already knew. The Cornett farm. Priscilla nodded. During the years before the war. And during the war itself. People moved through those mountains in ways the law did not allow. Some were fleeing. Some were hunted. Some simply needed to vanish. And the mountains could hide you if you knew where to go. The Cornett farm was one of those places. A waypoint. A refuge. A decision point between life and something worse. Priscilla said she knew of at least 3 people who arrived there and were never seen again. But here's what made her voice tremble. In some cases, she said, that was the intention. Meaning, they had escaped. Moved on. Crossed into something safer. But in other cases, she wasn't sure. And that uncertainty stayed with her for decades. Because not all journeys end the way they're supposed to. Dr. Rayron wrote everything down. Carefully. Precisely. But he didn't yet understand what it meant. Not fully. Because he didn't know about the passage. Didn't know about the marks. Didn't know about the man who had kept returning. Long after the war ended. That part came later. When Clarence Duff died. Alone. No family. No one to claim his belongings. Just a few objects that outlived him. A ledger. A notebook. And silence. The papers ended up in the hands of a schoolteacher. A man named Horace Cavender. He wasn't looking for a mystery. But sometimes, mysteries find the people willing to sit with them. And Cavender had something rare. Patience. He read the ledger first. Simple entries. Work done. Money received. Nothing unusual. Until he noticed the pattern. One name. Repeating. Again. And again. The Cornett Farm. 11 times. Across 6 years. And each entry. Vague. Almost deliberately so. Then the notebook. Harder to read. Cramped writing. Fading ink. The handwriting of a man who wasn't writing for anyone else. At first, it looked like directions. Routes. Distances. Stops along the way. But then. The numbers. Always at the end. Small at first. Then growing. A total. Cavender began to track them. Piece them together. Entry by entry. Number by number. And what he found made his hands stop. The total, by the last legible entry, was somewhere near 90. 90. Not days. Not miles. Not dollars. Something else. Something that accumulated. Something that was being counted. Carefully. Consistently. And then. The final note. Written differently. Slower. More deliberate. End wall. MC her mark. Let it stand. MC. Margaret Cornett. Let it stand. Cavender stared at those words for a long time. Because suddenly, the marks in the passage made sense. They weren't random. They were kept. Maintained. A record. But not for the world. Not for history. For something else. A monument. That word came later. In a letter. A letter written in 1877. Hidden among tax records. Misfiled. Forgotten. Until Cavender found it. It was written by Margaret herself. And in it, she explained everything. Without ever saying it directly. The count we began in the old cellar. Began. Not ended. Not discovered. Began. And then. Moved. To the lower passage. Meaning. The passage wasn't new. Duff hadn't built it. He had extended it. Strengthened it. Prepared it. For continued use. And the count? It continues there now, continues. Even after the war had begun. Even after everything changed. And then the line that changed everything. The only monument that was possible, and the only one that was wanted. A monument. Not of stone above ground. Not something visible. Not something that could be destroyed. But something hidden. Counted. Remembered. In darkness. Cavender needed answers. And there was only one person left who might have them. Hattie Farler. She was old. Very old. The kind of old that carries entire lifetimes in silence. She didn't ask what Cavender had found. She asked, "What do you think you know?" And when he told her, she listened. Quietly. Carefully. Then she said, "You have most of it." A pause. But not the beginning. And that was the part that mattered most. Because the beginning wasn't Duff. Wasn't the war. Wasn't even the passage. The beginning was Margaret. Years earlier. Before the war. Before the fear. When the house was still new. And the world had not yet decided what it was going to become. Margaret had grown up understanding something most people avoided. That the law is not always the same thing as what is right. And that sometimes helping someone survive means breaking something larger. When she came to that farm, she saw what it could be. Not just land. Not just a home. But a crossing point. A place where people could pass through the mountains unseen. A place where choices were made. Quietly. Irreversibly. And she made a decision. One that would shape everything that came after. Not her husband. Not the war. Her. And once that decision was made, there was no going back. Margaret looked at it once and saw something else entirely. Not storage, possibility. A room that locked from the outside. A steady, cool temperature year-round. A location hidden from the road, pressed into the hillside. It was, in every practical sense, the perfect place to disappear someone briefly, quietly, safely. The first person came through in the summer of 1849. Hattie didn't know who they were. Margaret never shared those details. Only that it had been arranged through a network she already trusted, one stretching north toward Ohio and south into Tennessee. A network built on absolute discretion, complete trust within, complete silence without. The cellar was used. The person rested. Then they moved on. And after they were gone, Margaret took a nail and carved a single mark into the wall. Not out of sentiment. Not for drama. For record. Someone had been here. Someone had passed through. 1. Over the next 15 years, the marks accumulated. Slowly. Irregularly. This was never a high-volume operation. It was careful, deliberate, dependent on circumstance, timing, and risk. Some years brought several travelers. Some years brought none at all. Each mark mattered. Each mark stood for a life that could not be written down, a journey that could not be recorded in any official way. The tally became, as Margaret would later write, a kind of monument, the only one possible under conditions of secrecy. No names. No documents. No trace. Only a count. By 1873, the system needed to change. The root cellar was no longer enough. The war had altered everything. And the years after it, far from stabilizing the region, had made movement even more dangerous in new, unpredictable ways. The network still operated. The need had not disappeared. But the infrastructure had to evolve. That was when Clarence Duff arrived. He didn't come by chance. He was brought in quietly, deliberately, through the same network. His past remained unknown to most in the county. But his reliability was clear enough to those who needed it. Duff built the passage. And he built it to last. A concealed corridor beneath the farmhouse, extending beyond the limits of the original cellar. Hidden, reinforced, carefully constructed to avoid detection even from someone standing directly above it. He returned 11 times over the next 6 years. For maintenance. For guidance. For work that could not be described in ordinary terms. And each time, the count continued. The last passage, Hattie said, took place in the early 1880s. Margaret was still alive. Still keeping the record. She counted them herself. Because the number mattered. Because approximation was not enough. When Cavender finally asked the question he had carried for years, how many, Hattie didn't answer immediately. The fire shifted between them. The room dimmed, then settled again. "I was inside it once," she said at last. "Margaret took me in. She wanted someone else to see." She had counted 112. 22 full sets of 5, and 2 additional marks. The final tally incomplete, 1 stroke short of closure. 112 people. Cavender sat with that number. Not as an abstraction. Not as a story. As a fact. 112 individuals who had passed through that farm, through the cellar, through the passage over more than 3 decades. People who arrived under conditions that required total concealment, and who left without leaving a trace behind them. No names. No records. No destinations. Only marks on a wall. "Why seal it?" Cavender asked. Hattie shook her head. "Margaret didn't. Hiram did. After Margaret's death, the decision changed. Maybe he believed the danger had passed. Maybe he simply couldn't carry the burden the way she had. Maybe both. He sealed the passage. Then hired the mason. Then left for 3 days, because he couldn't bear to watch it being opened again, even by accident." "And the name?" Cavender asked. "The one Duff had noted. The one carved at the very end of the passage." Hattie looked at him for a long moment before answering. "It was a woman's name. Just a first name. Carefully carved, separate from the tally marks. Not a number. A person. The first. The one who passed through in 1849. The one whose journey proved it could be done. The one who made everything that followed possible." Cavender did not write the name down. He made that decision before he even left her house. Some things, he understood, are not meant to be preserved publicly. Not because they don't matter, but because they matter in a different way. The name had remained private for 60 years. He saw no reason to change that. He never published his findings. After his death, his notes passed quietly into an archive, filed under a title that revealed nothing of their contents. By then, the farmhouse itself was gone, erased by the advance of coal mining, the land reshaped beyond recognition. The passage was gone. The cellar was gone. The wall, the beams, the earth floor, the marks, all gone. What remained was paper. A statement from Elias Pute. A physician's survey notes. Fragments of testimony. A ledger. A notebook. And Cavender's careful reconstruction. And one missing letter, Margaret's own words, known only through his transcription. Hiram Cornett died in 1903. He left no record of what he knew. If he ever wrote anything down, it has not been found. The number, though, remained. 112. Not a legend. Not an estimate. A count. 112 people who entered that passage and emerged somewhere beyond the mountains, into lives that cannot be traced back to that place. The marks did not record what happened next. Only this. Someone was here. Someone passed through. Someone was counted. And the silence that surrounded it all was not the silence of shame. It was the silence of protection. For those who passed through. For those who helped them. For a system that could only function if it left no trace behind. Margaret understood that from the beginning. The marks were never meant for history. They were not meant to be remembered. They were meant to be exact. And somewhere, at the end of that vanished wall, there was a name. A single name. The beginning of everything. Now lost, perhaps forever.